Hello and welcome to another BuildASoil YouTube episode. FAQ number 4 for season 4. Personally, I really like it when I have no clue what the question is or my mind starts to wander and I come up with an answer before it's even time. So let's just jump right in as per usual. Colby has the first question. Colby says, can you use something other than pumice? It's hard to find in bulk in Florida. Great question. Obviously you can get pumice from us, but in bulk and local, that saves on a ton of freight. So I don't want you to go force yourself to buy pumice because you don't have to. When we first started doing living soil, there was a lot of discussion about different inputs and nobody was, too particular. It's just that pumice, it has a very unique property. When you take a piece of pumice and you put it in a bucket of water, it'll float on top of the water even though it's a rock. Where all the other recommendations I have aren't gonna be so lightweight. And one of the things about living soil is it can get heavy and shipping it and all that stuff is a major problem. So pumice and rice hulls I really like using for the aeration. I'm gonna get into what you can replace pumice with, but let me start with the fact that we use pumice and rice hulls mainly because if we used all rice hulls, the drainage characteristic of the rice hull is not the same as the pumice. It adds some texture and it adds some drainage, but it will break down over time. And so if all you use is rice hulls, eventually you'll be without aeration. So we prefer something that's gonna last forever like pumice. Next, things that you could use. I would recommend also looking at lava rock. What we're looking for is things that have a lot of porosity. So when you look at the piece of lava rock or the piece of pumice, you should notice lots of holes in it. And when you inspect it with your eyes, you can tell that those would be spaces where microbes and water and air can occupy in that little piece of rock. Where if it's like a marble, it's perfectly smooth, there's no increased surface area where the air can hang out in there. So it will add some drainage in the fact that a marble wouldn't hold water. And that means that as a percentage of your recipe, it'd be less water holding, but it doesn't seem to be the same. What we're looking for is a lava rock, a pumice, something with the small holes in it. You can use perlite, but the problem with no-till recipes is we keep the soil forever, and the perlite does float to the surface, breaks down, and eventually goes away. I would recommend a few things. You can look at lava rock, and typically you're gonna find either a red lava rock or a black lava rock. The red will be higher in iron, the black one could be higher in manganese. Not always exactly true, but lava rock seems to be really safe. People have used it. I've used it a lot. And now the next question will be local, what do you have? And my only concern would be is if you buy decorative gravel or decorative lava rock, it could be painted or it could have a color added to it for landscaping purposes. So as long as that's not the case, you can probably buy any lava rock. A lot of us were going to like Home Depot and buying bags of lava rock for like fire pits. And as long as they weren't coated with anything, oftentimes that was thought to be fine. The other thing you can do is go to a landscape supply yard in your area. A lot of people will do xeriscaping and they'll have rock and different chunks of rock material. You can even put rock in your soil if you want. It will add drainage. Another thing that growers have been using forever to add drainage to potting soil would be adding sand. One of the better sources of drainage as far as a seedling soil that people have used across greenhouses forever would be sand. It's like glass, right? So it's kind of like that marble theory. The sand does have some rough edges. It will create more texture than something so smooth like a marble, but it is small. And so a lot of times we're looking for those bigger chunks, and that's why we talk about lava rock. Lava rock will have minerals. We're already adding basalt and other things in there to keep up with the drainage. So to be clear, I would be looking for rice hulls because you can get from BuildASoil, I think it's a 50-pound bale. I'm looking at it right now, but it expands to 7 cubic feet by the time they compress it and you uncompress it. So that could take care of, half of your drainage, and then you could source the lava rock or the pumice or whatever you can find. Now I have had growers do other things. I don't think they work as well, but I remember Tim Wilson said that he used to just use pea gravel. He wasn't too particular about it. It was cheap at the landscape yard. To me, I want that porosity to it, and I really like the pumice. Another thing that people have used is hydroton pebbles. I think they work horribly. They're not a good idea, but a lot of hydro growers convert into living soil. They have all these clay pebbles and they'll dump it into the soil. So you don't have to be too particular. I think the best would have some open holes in it like lava rock or pumice. Otherwise, we're just trying to get drainage. Try it, see what you think. I will say, if you pick a material that's not as common, a lot of times it can make overwatering slightly easier. So you just have to be cautious, but any of this stuff will work. Just sand would work. So don't overthink it too much, but also don't put a large bet on a brand new aeration if you've never done it before. Try and learn. Try maybe one container. I know before biochar was really available, a lot of us would go get like hardwood lump charcoal and break it up. Use that instead of biochar. Did it work as well? Not positive, but always try and find something that you can make work. All right, next question. Lee says, do you remove the old plant trunk when you're reusing soil? If I've got a big bed, a lot of times I'll leave the plant trunk right here and I'll plant my new plant right here next to it. So you don't have to, but oftentimes because that plant trunk was in the middle of your 15-gallon and we have a little transplant to go in, it's safe to remove that plant trunk and put your new transplant in there. The idea with no-till is to disturb the soil as little as possible. So a lot of us like to leave the stalk and all the roots in there to decompose with the soil, but that little bit of stalk is not totally necessary. You can pull it out, just do what's best for you based on your space. I have seen mushrooms grow out of them. It seems like worms get out right underneath that root ball and they'll inhabit that entire space and break it down. So you don't have to, but you can. Good question. If I was dumping and re-amending, I'd probably pull the rootstock out. It's just gonna end up random places in my bed and it may not be perfect. But when I'm no-tilling, a lot of times I'll leave it. Okay, next question. Popper says, my dry room humidity is at 52%, the temperature is at 62 degrees. That's the best I can do this year. Do you think that humidity will be okay? Yes and no. It's too dry, meaning if you leave it in there for too long, it's not gonna work. One of the things you can do is keep it at that 52% as much as possible. And as it starts to get crispy and as it gets closer, you can break it down into tubs to kind of bring all that plant material back close to each other into that smaller tub to keep the humidity closer to 60, but don't overthink it, don't ruin it. I really think 52% and 62 degrees will be just fine. I think what you'll notice is at 52% with a little bit of air movement and 62 degrees, you're gonna get crispy shorter than that 2-week time period. You might get a stem snap in 7 to 10 days. That last little bit of humidity does really help you extend it, but knowing that, I would just be cautious, and as I get closer to 5, 6, 7 days, I would be doing a little stem check to see if it's snapping. If it does feel like it's getting close and the thinnest stems are already snapping, then I would tub it all together. So the thicker branches and smaller branches are now in one big tub together, and I would kind of leave the lid cockeyed, and you could leave it in your same dry room area. That should buy you all the way to the end of that 2-week period before it gets too crispy. Of course, when I give this information, check on it. If it's your first time, I don't want you to load a whole bunch of lumber, cut the branches, fit it in a tub, and then potentially have it get too wet the first day or two when you put it back in there. So all I'm saying is 52 is probably fine, but we know it's on the dry side. So as you get further into the grow, you want to try and take it out of your dry room and put it consolidated into a smaller area so we have less airflow, really hyper drying it towards the end. So that'll extend your dry, and I think it'll work great. If that's too much for you, I think you could probably just harvest it in 7 to 10 days when it's snapping and put it in the jars. But I would try and get that extra, go all the way to 2 weeks by tubbing it. That typically is worth the effort for me. If you do over dry it, another thing is you can re-moisten it. I usually just take a whole tub, throw one tortilla in the top and close it, and then it slowly brings the moisture from that tortilla back through all the herb. And it usually almost never overdoes it. You don't have to use a tortilla. People use orange peels, all sorts of random stuff. I don't like Boveda packs. You can use something like that, but there are other ways to do it. I'm just saying that if you feel like you overshot it in the tub, you can always re-moisten. But then you're gonna wanna get it to an ideal moisture and back in the jar so that you're done with the volatility. Good question. Okay, Christopher says, here's a question. You mentioned that the mustard seed meal has antifungal benefits. I have a lot of damping off issues stunting seedlings here in Phoenix, no matter how careful I am with watering. Could mustard seed help? It does biofumigate the soil. And I will say that once that's done, it promotes fungal growth in the sense that now that the bad guys are gone, it seems like the good guys can take off and go crazy. When I top dress with a mustard meal, you see a lot of beneficial growth right away. It's totally possible it would cure that damping off. And that's part of why we do use the mustard seed meal in our seedling soil with that exact thought. We're hoping that we can put it in with the worm castings and everything else, and get that clean, that fumigant nature out of the mustard, and then bag it so that immediately by the time you get it to put your seeds in, there's a lot less likely a chance of damping off. Problem is, a lot of times the damping off is right there in the seed. There's just bacteria and fungus that's ubiquitous. And so then you've got this perfect environment for it, and if you overwater, it's still very possible. One of the big culprits of damping off is using a heating mat. Of course, if you're in Phoenix, I kind of doubt you're using a heating mat, but it could be that it's just super hot in your environment, and maybe that's causing some of the problem. You shouldn't get damping off on a lot of seeds. If you're having that as an issue, one of the things that you can do is pre-soak your seed in a little bit of hydrogen peroxide diluted down to maybe sterilize that. Other people will use a probiotic, so you can use Rootwise to start your seeds with, and that could outcompete it. As far as saying use the mustard and it's for sure going to beat damping off, I would be hesitant to tell you that. I think it's a good idea, but you'll also notice that the mustard seed can be a little hard on seedlings. So I would want to make sure you give yourself at least 10 days once you mix your potting soil with the mustard before you put your seeds in it, as a rule of thumb. Otherwise, I think Rootwise would probably be my go-to here. I would use some Rootwise with the seed to help prevent the damping off. Other than that, you obviously want to avoid overwatering, and that should definitely help as well. Next question by Flight says, can I use Growing Organics wetting agent in replace of the Kuyaha extract? Yes and no. So Growing Organics wetting agent is, we actually did an episode on how to make it. It's the Jadam wetting agent, and Growing Organic uses that recipe for their wetting agent. It's fine, but this is not for wetting the soil. This is for foliar sprays only. I'm sure if you did it once in the soil, it wouldn't cause a lot of harm, but we're talking about a wetting agent that is a liquid soap. And as such, it's alkaline, it's made from a caustic material like lye, and that's great for soap, but it's not that good for soil. And so the wetting agent, the reason why we use Jadam wetting agent or the Growing Organic wetting agent on our farm is for pest control, and a totally natural way of doing it. It's also great soap for your house, for your whole body, for everything in the house without adding, all these different chemicals that are normally involved in this and buying soap at the store. So it's a great soap for you. It's a killer wetting agent when it comes to foliar spray, but it's not good for using that wetting agent in the soil. The reason why we have the Kuyaha extract is that, for one, I don't like soap making that much. And so for me, it's easier if I'm gonna buy a purchased product to use the one that's like a food grade. You can put it in soda pop, you can put it in the soil, and you actually get growth promoting benefits out of the soil. But when it comes for foliar spraying, the Kuyaha is great, but something about the Jadam, how it has the oil in it, it helps suffocate aphids, and it provides more than just the wetting agent quality to it. And we noticed that when AJ first started making this, he tried a couple of different oils. He just sourced an organic version of the oil. So take that for what it's worth. They're not interchangeable completely, but there are places where they both work, like for foliar sprays. We also use soap nut. We have Thermex yucca extract. Just an alfalfa tea makes a lot of saponin. There's lots of ways to make saponin for the soil, but there's only one way to make the Jadam wetting agent. If you haven't seen that video, we have another YouTube video on the farm where my wife and AJ go through the soap making process and teach you how to make that so you don't even have to buy it. Of course, if you're like me and you don't like making soap, you can just buy it from Growing Organic. So, great question. Next question from Gabriel says, hello Jeremy, I was wondering if you could use some BuildASoil products for deep water culture, for DWC. To be more specific, I was wondering if the K&F Proline you sell would work good with DWC. Do you know anyone that has tried that before, and what are your thoughts on it? I don't want to give you too much guidance there because I have long since gotten away from hydro, but this does bring up a pretty hilarious story that I will share that's from the beginnings of me learning about living soil. I was on IC Mag and I was living with a roommate at the time. We built a really big, well, for me big, I think it was like a 9 or a 12 plant RDWC, a recirculating deep water culture setup. And if you've ever built one, it's like Legos. It's the most fun ever. I can tell why people like hydro. You get to buy buckets and drill holes and connect tubes, and you feel like a mad scientist. So I've done the DWC. I had great results. I wanted to run recirculating, so I did that. We were doing like Lucas formula, advanced. I did like a side-by-side, stuff that I would never do. I enjoyed it, but when I wanted to grow organic, like my heart was really on trying to grow fully organic. And part of it was I was growing food and I was like, can I use these new, I have to flush. Like, do I flush my tomatoes and my peppers? Is this safe? And so because I was growing food and weed, it started to cause a lot of these questions. Long story short, not only did I flood myself trying to grow organics, but I have kind of a funny story where I think it was Miss Green Dreams from Gascanistan's wife. She jumped in, she was growing like compost teas, 5-gallon buckets, and just keeping the soil and killing it at the time. I'm talking orange 5-gallon Home Depot buckets with bamboo poles and like a sea of them, and they were just killing it. And she jumped in my thread and was like, oh, organic hydro, that's cool, but I just add water and it seems way easier. And it kind of pissed me off and it stuck. And I was going through a lot of effort to brew compost teas, to dump into my RDWC without clogging it, and I still managed to clog it and caused a flood. but my results weren't as good. And I realized at that point that standing on the fence, you kind of get hit from both sides. And it was easier to like pick one or pick the other. Now I will say, fast forward a decade and I'm still tinkering. In this series, season 4, we're running an autopot, which it's not a deep water culture, but it does have a water that's added to the bottom that kind of automates it a little bit. And of course it's buckets and tubes and it makes me feel a little bit more like I'm tinkering in hydro, but I've come to love living soil so much, that's as far as I'll go. And I encourage you to do the same. I don't think that you should try those products in DWC. I think you should try them in soil. So take it for what it's worth. I really think that you'll enjoy living soil. That being said, I know people do add KNF and they add organic inputs to hydro setups to try and get all of the flavor and terps out of them. So I would reach out to the manufacturer there. I would probably hit up Fermented Plant Extracts on Instagram and say, hey, do you have any recommendations for trying this in DWC? I also think that with maybe an inline filter, you could probably run any of those and just clean your filter, clean your lines. There's a number of things that you could do. So consider that. All right, next one from Desert. Had to make sure it didn't say dessert. What can I use to kill whiteflies that's safe for nematodes I have in my soil? Got ran through the ringer with gnats last run. I see a few questions in here. Whiteflies, I also hear about gnats, and I see a mention of nematodes. So a lot of people know that there's good nematodes and there's also bad nematodes. And for the most part, you can't really see them in the soil. I mean, we're talking microscopic. So Desert wants to use something that can kill whiteflies, but still be safe for nematodes. Here's the thing is nematodes live in the soil and whiteflies are typically on the leaf. And so oftentimes what we do is sticky traps. You shake the plant, hold the trap and try and get them, increase airflow, use foliar sprays. Whiteflies are typically not that challenging to deal with. I would rotate through the BuildASoil method, which is choosing 2 to 3 organic products you like and rotate through them heavy. I would use a good sprayer like a Chapin where you can underside of the leaves with the wand and hit the top and the bottom. I would use like EM5, maybe some Dr. Zymes, maybe the Jadon wetting agent. That would probably be killer. But what I would do is I would rotate through those sprays heavy and hard and make sure that I just gave the whiteflies a run for their money. And I doubt they would stick around. Whiteflies typically get eradicated fairly easily. Next, once you've really reduced the population, you can defoliate, and a lot of times they will live on one leaf in a heavier population. You can remove that and get rid of it. I'm not an expert on all the different pests, but with whitefly, I don't think that would be an issue. I wouldn't worry about any of it affecting my soil nematodes because I'm going to be spraying the plant. Another thing is you mentioned, I think, fungus gnats, not just whiteflies. And you say you got run through the ringer with gnats on the last run. Well, hopefully those are gone. And if you've had a fresh run, in my experience, whiteflies only stick around when the plants are alive. So if you've gotten rid of that, hopefully you won't have any issues. Another thing you can try, we've mentioned in this episode, is the mustard seed meal. People use it as a biofumigant between rounds. You can definitely, between your rounds, sprinkle a little bit of that, and that should eliminate, at least help eliminate the fungus gnat larva, because it just doesn't seem to be, like, they don't like that spicy mustardness. So that might be one thing. Otherwise, whitefly, I gotta tell you, is something I've only had to deal with like once or twice, and it wasn't that challenging. And typically, the reason why they were there, at least in my experience, was I was growing pepper plants at the same time. I think I brought them from somewhere else, put them into my grow, and then I had whiteflies, and I basically just made it very, very hard for the whiteflies to want to be there anymore. I hope that helps you. Unfortunately, with a lot of organics, we're not trying to eradicate everything. So it's a lot of the same practices of just defoliating, foliar spraying, and avoiding the problem. But I really do think whiteflies should be easy to eradicate using the standard practices. Okay, next question, NYC Clear. NYC Clear says, do you use pumice on the bottom of the earth box between the matrix and soil like with the autopots? No. I literally just dump the soil in. Some falls through the holes and everything, and it's not a big deal. Those roots that go into the water will eventually eat that soil, and it doesn't seem to get too messy. I don't worry about it. And I don't like using the pumice in there because that would take some of the volume out that I would have. The reason why we used the pumice in the autopot is there's no bottom tray that holds the roots above. Now, they did give me a tray that I could use that would replace the aeration on the bottom. So if you see in that video, I show you that tray that goes with the air base. That would kind of be like the earth box tray where you don't have to add the pumice. But because I wanted to do it exactly how most people do it, I ditched the tray and I just used pumice. You could probably use your earth box the same way by removing the plastic grate, filling the bottom with pumice, and keeping your wicking spots open. But I think that would take away some of the reservoir space where the water would sit. The auto pot can always call for more water, where the earth box, I want it to have as much water as possible, and then when it drinks, create that air gap between the plastic surface and the water. That way there's air in the root system, and then slowly drink the rest. So I just use the plastic tray in the earth box with nothing else. So good question, really good question. Another thing to look up is the perched water table. There's, some people have recommended never putting the pumice in the bottom of a container because they say that all it does is it doesn't add more air. It just raises up that level in which the water will hold. I don't find that to be true so long as there's airflow and it can go into the container. I feel like getting it to stand above where I might be bottom watering is the goal there. So just take that for what it's worth. You do not have to use pumice in the earth box. However, you probably could. Next question. Chris says, I'm new at this. Can you please tell me if I can freeze my product and how long I can keep it frozen for? Maybe you don't smoke it that fast, and so you're thinking if I put it in the freezer, it'll last longer. Do not keep it in the freezer. I've had some buddies that kept their herb in the freezer. It was always terrible. It's not the end of the world, but I don't think it does good things for the herb. And then you've got to kind of like dry it back out, so to speak, or you've got to unfreeze it before you smoke it. And so my preference would be to just put it in a jar, put it somewhere like 60 degrees or cooler and in the dark. And so for me, that means I just put my jars in a box and I tuck them away, or I put them in a drawer. Usually I'm growing another grow. So it only has to last so long before I kind of get tired of the flavor, or I turn it into edibles or something like that. And that's part of the goal. The other thing I've noticed is if you're gonna keep a whole bunch in one jar and you're gonna open it all the time, it's better to keep it in stuff you don't open and keep a smaller one that you're gonna open often. And maybe that'll help you avoid the freezer. But I do not recommend the freezer. I'd prefer you to just have it in a jar, keep it away from light, and keep it cooler. Like you don't want it 100 degrees and you don't want it 30 degrees, but if you just keep it in that 50, 60, 65 degree range, it'll last a very long time in that jar and you'll be good to go. That's the best way to store it. Last question, Pure Muscle. Pure Muscle says, will you be having a Black Friday sale this year, Jeremy? If so, when will the Black Friday sale start? All right, we will be having a Black Friday sale, and I will give you some hints. Like, it's tough. We're a small business, and then it goes insane all in one day, and we're not like 1,000 employees where you can just shift on the fly like that. But for sure, we're doing Black Friday. We do one every single year. A lot of you are waiting for it. It will absolutely be the biggest and best sale of the year, so you're gonna wanna participate. We will be sending an email out, and we will be giving early access to our patrons. Not positive how we're gonna do it, but we're gonna make sure that our patrons have at least some early access to the sale. Other than that, I do think that the entire country is starting Black Friday a little bit earlier this year. So it's likely that we'll start ours slightly earlier than normal. For us, we've got to keep it somewhat manageable. But because it's a really good time of the year and we've done it every year, we're gonna continue to do it every year. There will be a Black Friday sale this year, and it will be in November. And I think it's gonna start slightly sooner than normal. So look for that email, look for the social media marketing. I promise we'll be talking a lot about it. And thank you so much for all these questions. That's it. That's FAQ number 4. I really appreciate these questions. You know, we do a lot of videos. We have a lot of content, and we get thousands of responses. And it may feel like we're not able to interact on everybody's response, and it's true, we cannot. But what we can do is we can see that you're asking questions. We can make videos about them. We can do our best to answer them in a way that'll last longer. So we really appreciate you asking these. Keep doing it. Load up every video with questions. And of course, help each other if you know the answer. Otherwise, wait for an FAQ video. I'll do my best to answer them for you. And we're just gonna keep this whole thing going. Thank you so much. And until next time, I'll see you guys on the next BuildASoil episode.